Hey guys, and welcome back to CrohnsCast Live and the start of our short series where we were going to be covering the topic of women's health, and we've got some amazing volunteers. Tonight we're talking to Natalie, aka the Spoonie Mummy, and yeah, we're going to be finding out all about her story and her experience with IBD and her health, focusing slightly more on pregnancy. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Natalie into the room.
Hi.
Hey, Natalie, just want to introduce yourself to people that are going to be watching.
Yeah, I'm Natalie. I'm 34 and I've got them. I have 2 boys and a stepdaughter. I live in Derby and I write a blog, which is why I'm known as the Spoonie Mummy, all about life with chronic illnesses and ostomies.
That's amazing. I followed your Instagram for a short while, and I do really enjoy the stuff that you put out. One of the crazy questions that I've got is like, do you know where Spoonie came from? I've always wondered that.
Yeah, it's a lady. She actually followed me a lot long ago on Twitter. She's an American lady that came up with the spoon theory. And when she followed me on Twitter the other month, I was like, oh, Mama Spoon follows me. But she basically made, she was talking to a friend about the sort of fatigue side of chronic illness and trying to explain it in a way she could understand. And she was in her kitchen, which is why it came down to spoons. But she sort of gave her 20 spoons and said, that's basically your energy for the day. And say you use 3 to get up in the morning and get showered, and then you use another 2 to get dressed. But she said, was sort of explaining that for somebody with a chronic illness, that would take more spoons, or they'd start with less. And by breakfast, after she finished breakfast, she'd basically got no spoons left in this sort of setup she'd made. And she was just showing her. And I remember reading it years and years ago, and I was just like, this is how I want to explain fatigue to everybody I know, because they just hear that and think, oh, I get tired too. And it's just not the same at all. So when I read it, I was like, this is like how you should understand it. This is how I feel. And so, yeah, it was from her, the spoon theory.
Oh, well, that makes much more sense now. I've heard the spoon theory, but then I thought there might be something more to this, because I've seen a couple of people now that have called themselves Spoonie, or there's like there's a Spoonie community as well, which I found was quite interesting.
Yeah, some people call Spoonies, and since then there's become charges as well. They use it like a battery. So okay. Their battery's full, and a spoon or a charger would only start with half, say, a battery of battery power of the day, and that's why they use it up quicker, sort of thing. So there's a few different variations on it. Some people don't like the spoon theory, some people prefer something else, but I mean, it's a bit random that it's spoons, but I think like she said, she was just in her kitchen at the time and it was something she had a bunch of to hand.
Yeah, it's needs must, isn't it? It's sort of it's one of those situations. Yeah. So for the guys just joining and the people that maybe don't know your story, could you talk about who you were before you were diagnosed with IBD?
Yeah, well, I've never known life without chronic illness. I was 15 months old when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So I've sort of grown up in the hospital, really. And it was about I was about 8 or 9 when my bowel problems really started. But at the time, they weren't into doing a lot of invasive tests. Obviously, I was only a child. And so they did an ultrasound, which obviously wouldn't really pick much up if for IBD. And they just put it down to the drugs I was on, because obviously I was on a lot of strong drugs from quite a young age. And they were like, oh, it's just making your bowel sluggish and that's why you're having problems. And it was actually a long time. I was 26 when I was diagnosed. And I remember going in, I'd been having issues since I'd got married, and it turned where I was struggling mostly with constipation. I was then having severe bouts of diarrhea and weight loss and having like the mucus in there and stuff like that. So my GP referred me just due to my health history. She said, I think it's just best we do a colonoscopy and get it checked. And even the doctor, as he was about to do the scope, was like, I think it's just IBS, you'll be fine. And then he put the scope in and it was like, oh, crap. Like it was full of blisters and ulcers. And so that's where it started. But for all those years, I've sort of been struggling with no real reason to it. And then after that, I thought, because I have had arthritis for so long, it's sort of one of those things, to an extent, you just have to get on with it. And it does hurt on a daily basis. And sometimes you do have to spend the whole day in bed because you can't do anything. And I sort of took that on with Crohn's. And it wasn't till I started joining the IBD like online support groups 3 years later. And they were like, oh, when you have a flare, you should really go into the hospital. And I remember one Christmas I'd flared, and in 6 days I'd lost over a stone. And at the time I only weighed just over 8 stone. So it's a lot of weight to lose in that short space of time. But I was just like, oh, it's just because I've got Crohn's. I've just got to carry on. It's just got to be. So yeah, it wasn't until, like I say, I joined the IBD groups, and it was lucky I did that when I did, because that was when a few months later I had my major flare that eventually resulted in me having to have the surgery to have my ostomy.
And how old were you whenever you had to have your surgery?
It was 2 days after my 30th birthday. So I always joke that it wasn't the bag I wanted to have for my 30th, but yeah.
That's quite similar to me then, actually. It was I was towards the end of my 29th year whenever I ended up having to go into hospital because of the state I was in. And literally my 30th birthday was when I had my first surgery.
Oh,
I was in hospital for that long, and I just remember talking to the anaesthetist as he was gearing me up. And he was explaining stuff, and I was like, today's my birthday. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. And then I was like, well, actually,
yeah.
You're giving me a cure, so it's a pretty good birthday gift.
Yeah, well,
I say cure. You're fixing my problem.
At the on the actual day of I'd been in hospital 2 weeks before my surgery, but on the actual birthday, the nurses were like coming in with my Oromorph and being like, "Happy birthday!" And I was like, "This really isn't like the present I wanted." But
Oromorph still makes my stomach do somersaults.
I had to have a central line put in that day, and they'd got me to sign the consent form, and because it was 1904 and I'm used to writing my birthday, that's what I wrote, and they were like, oh, it's not 1986, are you okay? And I was like, oh no, it's just because I'm used to writing my birthday.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant. Traveled them back in time. So whenever you were told you're going to have this surgery, how did that make you feel?
It was a shock. I know when I was first diagnosed with Crohn and told it was Crohn's, my first thought was, oh, I'm going to end up with one of those bags. And I didn't know anything about them. I'd just obviously seen them or heard of them. I didn't understand there was different types of stoma. Didn't understand really what it meant. And I was just like, I'm going to end up with one of those bags. But by the time I'd got around to having my surgery, I'd been in IBD support groups for about 6 months by then. So I'd met people with stomas. I'd seen that they were carrying on with life as normal. There was obviously other young women that I looked up to who were still having children, still going to work with one, wearing bikinis and all things like that. So by the time I actually had the surgery, I was like, I just need this fixed, because I was in a real state. And actually it didn't worry me quite as much. There was quite a short time. They literally told me the day before that this is what we're going to have to do. So I didn't really have a lot of time to think about it and dwell on it. But
yeah, it is a very quick flash to bang, so to speak.
Yeah.
And what were your thoughts? Would you have any immediate concerns vis-a-vis for your sort of as a woman? Were there anything? Did they talk about anything about risk to reproductive health and things like that, or was it?
They didn't at all mention anything. It was a case of, because the part of my small bowel that they had to remove, they did a right hemicolectomy, so it was a chunk of my small bowel they had to take out and the beginning of my large bowel. But it was basically so close to being completely blocked. There wasn't really another option for me anyway. So it was like, we've got to do it regardless. And there was no sort of discussion about fertility or anything like that. And it's not until recently I've now got to have the op to remove the rest of my large bowel, making the ileostomy permanent. And my doctor, one of the first things she asked me was, do you want any more children? Because this can obviously affect fertility and I think they'd rather you try and have your babies before they do it rather than after. But yeah, at the time it was literally just, this is what we're going to do. There was no sort of, this is what's coming after. I met the stoma nurse the morning of my surgery. She literally came, gave me a stoma bag and drew some crosses on my stomach as to where my stoma should be placed. And it was just like, oh, we'll see you after, because there's no time to do anything before. So
oh wow, so like literally the day. Yeah. That is crazy. So like you didn't get a chance to have a little sticky red thing stuck on your
I didn't get the fake stoma or anything. No, I literally just got given a bag, and that was it.
No, that is crazy. So after you've come out of surgery, what was it like for you adjusting to life having this ostomy?
It was up and down. A couple of months before I had the surgery, me and my husband actually split up. So I was a single mum to my 2 boys. Obviously, he was very much involved and had them. I was in hospital for a month in total, so obviously they stayed with him then. But I think my first sort of it was just, I want to get out of hospital. I need to be back with my boys, and it did sort of, because I felt so much better, like literally immediately after the surgery. I'd had it in the afternoon. I remember like texting some of my friends at 10, 11 o'clock that night, because they'd got me to the post-surgery ward and set me up with my phone and everything. And I was like feeling happy as Larry. I was like, this is so less pain, like so much less pain than I was in just a few hours ago, even though I just had this massive surgery. But I felt so much better. And then going home, it was a little bit of a shock to the system, because I was obviously recovering from a big operation and I was a lot more tired, and then having to get used to this new bag and a routine that worked for me took a little while. So I think that was a bit of a shock to the system. But
and you said you were already a mum as well of 2.
Yeah, I'd already got my boys then.
And so how did you manage things like that? How did you feel about that? Obviously, because it's pretty much straight into the fire, really.
Yeah, well, at the time, it was quite handy because my oldest was in year 2 at school, and they were doing a big topic on the body. So he was fascinated with what was going on and bits of intestine here and there, and that he could then see my intestine. And they came in the day after my surgery, and they wanted to look at it straight away and check it out and all that. So that was all good. But then when we got home, obviously I'd got into quite a routine in the hospital of getting up and having, like you do, they bring you the stuff to shower with in the morning, and you go and do that. And then the stoma nurse would come and we'd change the bag. So when I got home, I sort of kept that routine, but obviously then they needed to go to school. So my mum stayed with me for the first sort of week and a half after I got out of hospital to help out. But it was just little adjustments, like I'd started to shower or bath in the evening and do my bag change then, because there just wasn't enough time for stuff like that in the morning when you're trying to get 2 kids ready for school. But overall, compared to because I'd been really seriously ill for the 6 months sort of prior to the operation, it was actually a lot easier than in that. There was instances where I was having to phone my friend because I was stuck on the toilet, and it was supposed to be going to collect the kids. And luckily she had children at the same school, and she was brilliant. She'd just pick them up and I'd meet her on the way back and things. But actually, once I'd had the stoma, it was a lot easier than it had been when I was seriously ill.
Yeah, it's amazing how much of a difference that surgery can actually make whenever you are that sick, to all of a sudden you've gone from being exceptionally unwell to the point of almost being bedbound to actually feeling like you could sustain and have a life. Yeah, it's crazy. So where did things go from there? So you mentioned a larger surgery coming up. How have things changed along the way, or what's been going on?
Well, we've got to the point, and they've been talking about it for a couple of years, really. My rectum's just so scarred. It's sort of really narrowed, and they can't really do colonoscopies anymore. They've tried like pediatric scopes, and it's just not happening. So obviously the worry is with anything that's left, it's just a cancer risk. So eventually they always take it out anyway, unless you're being reconnected. But with me, they can't even check to see what's going on in it. So I'm having sort of mucus and blood passing and all that sort of problems still. So it was the start of this year, I actually said to my doctor, look, I'm ready to do it now, because it was a massive surgery. And I was like, after coming out of hospital for a month, and I've had a couple of sort of hospital stays in between that as well, I was like, I'm just not ready for another big surgery yet. I'm just not ready. And at the start of this year, I was like, no, we can do it. And she was like, I'm really pleased, because I'm really worried about the fact that we've not had a proper colonoscopy for a good couple of years. And then obviously COVID happened. So that sort of slowed all the process down, and we're just waiting to sort of get back onto a more even keel with everything, I think. Luckily, it's not an emergency situation that they've got to get it out. But I've met with a surgeon. I'm actually having another MRI next week, so that they can get some up-to-date images and stuff, so that they can all have a meeting together and discuss what's going to happen. But I don't imagine it's going to be happening till at least next year.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to have that expectation, because it's I think a lot of people that have a manageable chronic disease are feeling in the position where a lot of our community feels right now, in terms of waiting lists are now obviously through the roof, unless it's an emergency, because the routine processes have obviously stopped for a significant period of time. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, so it's been 4 years since your initial surgery, and obviously it was very quick flash to bang from being notified to actually going under the knife.
Yeah.
Did you have any concerns, or have you had any concerns, or how did you broach the subject of intimacy with having all these changes happen? Was that nerve-wracking for you, or did you find that you were able to overcome it?
It was. Obviously, I'd split up with my husband sort of 2-3 months before my surgery, so I wasn't with anybody. I didn't really think about it. I was just on all I want to do is get home, see my kids, and just start getting on. Now I'm feeling better. But I do remember going to my 6-week post-op checkup with my stoma nurse, and she was very just brash and out there, and she was like, well, have you done it yet? And I was like, no. I was like, I'm single, like I've not. And she was like, oh, get a move on, you need to try it. And I was a bit like, oh, but I actually
that is brilliant. I love that. I love it when you come in and just get taken on.
It was lovely. She did make me feel a lot better. But I'm glad, to be fair, she wasn't the first stoma nurse I met, but by then I was sort of like, no, we're okay now. But then, I met somebody that also had a stoma. So it kind of, I think, softened the blow a little bit that first time. I'd been on a date in between times with somebody I actually went to school with. It never progressed past a first date, but he obviously knew I'd been in hospital, was asking lots of questions, and was actually really lovely about it. And it didn't bother him. He just wanted to know what happened and all that sort of stuff. So that actually gave me confidence to think, although it didn't go any further, I was like, if he can accept this, then there's hope that there'll be somebody out there. But then, like I say, I met somebody that's also got a stoma, so it wasn't as big an issue for me. It was probably a little bit easier going down that route with somebody else who had a bag.
And what would your advice be to womankind that are going through a similar process and maybe have concerns about intimacy?
I think just being upfront and honest is always the best way. There's a lot of chatter on sort of stoma groups and stuff about people not being accepting of them, but it's hard. It's hard to take on somebody with a chronic illness. It is a big commitment, and I think if you're honest and upfront and say, this is what I need and this is what I have, and they say, no, I can't handle it, I don't think you can sort of blame them for that. Almost, they're not an awful person, they're being honest. My ex-husband couldn't handle me being as ill as I was, and that eventually ended up ending our relationship. So I think if somebody's that upfront and honest and says, no, it's not for me, then you've got to be accepting of it. But just remember that there are many more people out there who absolutely don't care, and you will find somebody and it'll be absolutely fine. And to be honest, nowadays I don't even think about it when I'm in the bedroom. Like, it's not something I think about unless it's particularly full or something. I'm like, I really need to go to the toilet first. But But yeah, it's not an issue at all.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind whenever you are entering into that thing. It's less about you than you think it is.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, and then not to get all great showman on it, but doing the "this is me" sort of stint is always going to be helpful, because again, you're not going to change. These are unchangeable factors within your life.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one for me, because I was slightly bashful whenever I first got my ostomy, and it was a sort of, it may not have seemed it at the time, because I had quite a bit of a bravado and was quite a sort of, what do you call it, outgoing person.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a concern for me about sort of less about taking top off, more about moving into the sort of intimacy region. It just because it's an unknown. And I remember a stomach nurse actually talked to me about what does she call them? She had a specific name for them. They're essentially, it's a little disc that you'd put over your stoma. So you didn't have a bag that's cumbersome hanging around. And she recommended them for swimming as well, actually. But their first thing was like, if you're going to become intimate, you put that on, and it's there. And actually, when you've got that on, it's skin tone colored, and actually you can barely notice that there's anything there whatsoever. But yeah, it's such a big thing, because I think generally relationships are a awkward topic for most people, irrespective, because we've all got our own hang-ups.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it was like initially whenever you first met your current partner, who has, I'm assuming he's got a stoma, yeah?
He has, yeah.
What was his input, and how did he feel about it? Or was it, we both got stomas and that kind of broke the ice? Or
he'd had a stoma for a lot longer than me, so I think he'd got used to it. He'd been in a relationship since having his stoma and stuff like that. So I don't think it really, we met on an IBD support group. That's how we sort of met. We were friends at first, and then it just gradually sort of chatting more and more, and it sort of went from there. So we talked about it, and it just didn't crop up, as it were, in that sense. I remember the first leak I had overnight was the first time I stayed at his house, which was horrific. But he was brilliant. He just got up, gave me some stuff to go to the bathroom with, and sort my bag out. And I got back, and he changed the sheets, put the sheets in the washer, brought me a cup of tea. And I was like, it's just those little things.
He's a keeper.
It made me feel so much better. And he's like, I've been there, so I know what it's like. It's horrible when you have a leak, but it's not a big deal. We can just sort it out, and it's fine.
Oh, so you knew it was you straight away. It wasn't a case of you both waking up and going,
oh yeah, no, sometimes it's a bit like that at night time. We've got 2 dogs as well, so if they start too soon in the night, we're like, is it a stoma or is it the dog?
Oh Jesus, yeah, that's you're having a run around there, giving a good sniff.
Yeah. But
before you mentioned, obviously you were diagnosed with IBD a long time before your surgery, and one of the topics that we've been asked to talk about is how sort of fertility and sort of conception and things like that sort of work for women, in particular with IBD. Would you mind talking into like what's been your experience with your children?
Yeah, well, when I got pregnant with both of mine, my IBD at that point was undiagnosed, although I was having bowel problems since I was a child. So with my first, I'd actually been started on infliximab. I'd been on methotrexate for a few years. That's a drug that you have to come off if you're attempting to get pregnant, never mind pregnant, because it's a chemotherapy drug and it can affect that sort of thing. But I'd actually just not long, probably maybe about 6 months before that, been put on infliximab. And my partner lived down in Essex, and I'd got a temporary job working for the summer at an airport. So when that came to an end, it just sort of made sense. He'd got his own business down there, so I moved down that way to be with him. Came off the infliximab, came off the methotrexate because of the move, and we decided to start trying for a baby anyway. And it really happened super quick. It didn't take long at all. I think we were trying for 2 months. And my pregnancy with Leo, my first little boy, was absolutely amazing. They often say pregnancy can tip you one of both ways. You can be really, really healthy, or you can be flaring sort of throughout it. And I was brilliant. I didn't flare. My arthritis, my bowels were quiet. It was the one time I was almost normal in the anemia range, because I'm always anemic, and saying pregnancy is supposed to bring it lower, and it didn't. And I felt fantastic. And then it was sort of like 8 weeks after having him that everything sort of kicked back in again, and I just felt like death. And it was like a scrabble to get me back on my meds and stuff like that. And then I lost a baby in between him and my other little boy. But again, with Riley, it was pretty quick. Although I did struggle more during my pregnancy with him, I was still flaring and things like that. Bowel-wise, I was having to have enemas to help me go to the toilet and things like that. So that was a lot more difficult. And then he was 11 months old when I got diagnosed officially with Crohn's. And we did actually start trying for a third in probably about a year later. But because I'd had that whole, oh, I've just got to get on with it mentality, so I didn't really know what I was going to the doctor about. My doctor, to be fair, at the hospital I used to be at, wasn't exactly brilliant either. And I got pregnant twice and lost them both very early. But at the time I was probably flaring and not in the sort of best health state anyway, never mind for myself, but never mind supporting a pregnancy. So that was pretty tough. And like I say, it was this year when my doctor, when we finally agreed that this operation needs to be done, she asked me if I was sort of done having babies. And although I'd love another one, I think at this point it's just not, for me, really feasible with all the surgery I've had.
Yeah, and that's such a really scary experience to go through all of that. And you know, I don't think I'm able to ever understand what that process is like to go through a miscarriage once, let alone on multiple occasions. Were they able? Did they discuss it with you as to the potential reasons as why? Did they relate it to IBD and being in flare, or was it just rounded off as a? They
guessed that was the first one was quite different. It was a little bit later on, and there was different things at play. But the second two, certainly, they were pretty sure that it was my IBD and just that my health wasn't good enough. When I eventually ended up in hospital for the flare that ultimately I ended up with my surgery from, I was in hospital the November before. And it was all sorts of things. I get very low in, it was like protein and all things like that. Just my body just wasn't absorbing things properly. So they were pretty sure. But because I decided after the third one, I was like, I'm not trying again. I need to have a break. I can't keep doing this. They didn't choose to look into it anymore to make it certain. But they were pretty positive that that's why my body was sort of saying, no, this can't happen.
And what sort of things, like I know a couple of girls actually nearby that have had flares during pregnancy, and I can't think of anything like having a flare at the best of times is pretty shit. Excuse the pun, but like what is it like having a flare during pregnancy? Like for me in my head right now, it feels like a very scary experience. I'm just wondering what advice are you giving whenever that's happening? Because there's going to be limitations on drugs and everything, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't allowed to obviously take methotrexate. That was banned even when I was trying for a baby. You have to stop taking it 3 months before you start trying and things like that. When I was pregnant with my boys, biologics were also stopped. But I do know now that they are allowed to continue biologics during pregnancy up to the end of the second trimester. And you can continue taking them after that if you're still flaring. And it just means that babies' jabs have to be delayed, the immunisations, because obviously of live vaccines and things like that, if they still have some of that treatment in them, it can cause problems. So that's a bit different now, because ladies are allowed to carry on those medications, which should should help stop a flare. I was given steroids in my second pregnancy to keep my symptoms at bay, which in itself has its own issues. Obviously, I've not actually been off of them since that pregnancy in varying doses, because at different times I've had to have it increased. I've been on IVs when I've been in hospital and things like that. So it's all been a bit of a nightmare, but that was sort of what I was offered at the time. But like I say, I know now a lot more women are allowed to stay on their biologics because they've deemed it's more safe in pregnancy.
And what are do they ever talk about the significant impacts prior to you? Like, I'm assuming you had a discussion at some point for your later children about having IBD and the impacts that might have, or did that not happen?
They hadn't really discussed it with me about whether it could be hereditary or anything like that. They know I've obviously got children. And I know I was asked if I had any family history of IBD, which I don't. It plays on your mind a little bit. My oldest, had a lot of issues when he was younger with constipation, and he had a prolapsed bowel, and obviously that set me right off. But he's been fine since sort of the age of 6, 7. He's sort of sorted it right out. But yeah, it's something that plays on your mind. I think I remember, obviously, I'd got rheumatoid arthritis, which was diagnosed at the time. And I know when my boys were 15 months old, I would find myself checking their knees and things like that. So I think it will play on your mind. You change the nappies and you're anything different with their poo, you're like, oh. But yeah, I've not really had any, like I say, guidance from the hospital, as it were, with that. But it definitely plays on your mind a little bit, I think, but it will do, and the chances are it won't happen.
And like, what's your feelings around the topic? Like, how would you think we're best support the female population of our community with this sort of context? Because, like, just chatting to you now, I am completely uneducated in what it is like to be a woman and have IBD and have these urges to have a family, and how complicated a process that actually has become. I'm like, up until this discussion, my advice had been, that I know women have been able to have children and have IBD and have ostomies and have been successful at it. But like, none of the things that you're talking about, none of the risk factors that have become apparent that you've mentioned were ever on my radar. And I'm just wondering, like, what way would you advise us to best support our women?
I just think, obviously, it's the thing, a lot of people plan it, don't they? And they think, oh, we're going to start trying for a baby. And it just isn't that easy when you've got something like IBD, because it may be that you need to change your medications and you need to be aware of certain things. I know once I did get pregnant, I was consultant-led from the off, because they didn't know how my body would react to pregnancy or anything like that. And it ended up that I had to have an emergency C-section, and years later they think I've got a lot of scar tissue around my bowel and around my womb and that, and they think it's all interlinked with this, why I wasn't able to give birth naturally in the end. And I just think it needs to be spoken about much earlier, even when a woman's sort of coming up to the age of sort of 16 to 18. Something needs to be done to talk about. I mean, I spoke to you about contraception and things like that. So many people don't know that women with IBD shouldn't be taking the pill because it doesn't get absorbed properly. I
did not know that.
No, that's crazy. Yeah, it's quite. I sought out information myself, and I made a point of talking to my doctors about it, but it was something they never brought up with me. And I was like, it's such a risk, especially because I'm on methotrexate. I'm very sort of fastidious about contraception and making sure I'm safe and that I don't get pregnant. But a lot of people don't realise. They go to their GP, who doesn't often know a lot about IBD themselves anyway. They're not a specialist. And the most common form of contraception is the pill. They just give them that, and actually it could be really dangerous, because if you do get pregnant on certain medications, or if you get pregnant and you're in a flare, it can be devastating. You could end up losing that baby because your body's just not well enough to support it. And even though you don't know that at the time and it was an accident, it's obviously, it's just gutting. So I just think that chat needs to be had with girls. Obviously, if you're diagnosed later, it needs to be done on diagnosis. But if you've got somebody coming up to the age of sort of 16 to 18, whenever it's deemed appropriate, it needs to be had and spoken about.
Yeah, no, that's quite scary. And, you know, like, there, even with the IBD community, the amount of accidental pregnancies, certainly in young adults, is rising. And like, if you think that you are protected because you're taking a pill, like that's it's almost misadvertising. It's like saying that a condom for a bloke, if you've got IBD, is only 50% effective. Like, yeah. It's insane. So what is the contraceptive from an IBD perspective that you would advise people to take? Is it like the coil, or is it like something different to that?
Yeah, the coil is an option. The coil I ended up going for last year, which in itself was a bit of a nightmare, because obviously I've talked about my scar tissue issue. So I ended up in theatre to have that put in. But it's working brilliantly well. So now I've got 5 years of not having to think about it. I was on the patch before that, which worked brilliantly. It's just like a nicotine patch. You put it on your arm, it stays on there for a week. You have 3 weeks of patches, and then you have a week break. That worked really well at the start, but then it started sort of failing on me, and it wasn't quite working properly. So that's why I had to change it. There's an injection, but that's not suitable if you have arthritis either, because it can thin your bones. And obviously I've had rheumatoid arthritis since I was a baby, so they don't want to cause any more damage to my bones. So they suggested that's not an option really. So if you've got problems with arthritis, it's probably not the best one either. And the other one's the implant that you can have, the little thing. I think the nurse puts it in your arm. I'm not sure how often you have to have it done. And that just sits in your arm, but that freaks me out a little bit. But that was another option that I had. But yeah, like I say, anything that's taken orally, it's just not advised, because even if you feel okay in yourself, you still may not be absorbing everything. And if you do happen to flare, you don't know if it is absorbing or not. So
yeah, and I guess, well, it's when you explained it the way you have, it sounds very, you know, it doesn't sound very complicated. It sounds like very obvious.
Yeah, it does, and that was what baffles me at why it's never sort of brought up. But I think doctors, you go in there, ask for contraception, they're like, right, then this is the prescription, and they do it so often they don't tend to think about what else that patient might be going through. And
I just had a random thought in my head, completely unrelated and probably very poorly timed. But I was just thinking that when you mentioned that you had to go into theatre for your coil because of the scar tissue, I was like, I wonder, should members of the IBD community get an honorary degree in drama because we spend that much time in theatres?
I think so. I think we deserve one. I'd dread to think the amount of hours I've racked up in there, but yeah.
So we've mentioned contraception, and I think, again, I guess another topic that I didn't even realize was a topic to be had. It's literally, it's blowing my mind, the different things that really do seem to impact womankind. Because obviously they have brought out a pill now for men to take, which I have my own thoughts on. Partly, I think it's like a consumerism sort of thing that's just going to try and make people spend more money. But I'm just like, there's obviously breastfeeding as well, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on And how were you able to breastfeed? Because again, that's another concern, especially if you're taking biologics, whether or not these things are going to be within your mammary glands and transferred to the child.
I did with both of mine. My first pregnancy, we'd obviously discussed a lot of what was going to happen after the birth. They'd set up an appointment for 8 weeks after my due date, because they said normally when you are pregnant, you're very good, which did happen with my first pregnancy. It's like I didn't have any of my problems. And then you tend to have a big time flare up then once your body starts and your hormones start going back to normal after you've had the baby. My son actually came a couple of weeks early. So I had to wait that extra bit longer for my appointment. So that was a bit of trouble. But I ended up going into my GP because I was really struggling, and they put me on steroids at that point just to sort of tide me over till I saw my consultant. But they weren't sure about whether you could safely breastfeed on steroids, and it was a low dose, but they were like, we just recommend you stop because we don't know. So I did stop. I think it was 12.5 weeks I did with Leo, and then had to stop.
How did that make you feel? Because I know breastfeeding everything surrounding womankind, and in particular when it's evolving sort of the maternal aspect, it can be a very difficult environment. I know from my experience with my wife and being part of like breastfeeding groups and things like that, it can almost become quite martial, the sort of experiences sometimes that other people may put on you, or your own desires for how you perceive you should be as a mother. Like, how did it make you feel?
I was gutted. I really was. I think it wasn't the easiest thing to do at first, and I think we just sort of got into our rhythm by then, and it was becoming a lot easier and it was a lot better. And then I had to stop, and I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, I was gutted. I think there's a lot more sort of press and that out there now about fed is best and things like that. And back then we didn't really have social media. Leo's nearly 12 now, so it was quite a while ago. But yeah, it was, like I say, I think I never looked down on myself. I thought he's being fed either way and he's got a bottle and that's fine. But yeah, I was just gutted personally because we'd got over those first few weeks, which are really difficult, and like I say, got into our routine and it was working really well. So for them to stop, it was hard, especially because I turned to medical professionals and they didn't know, and I was like, you're the people that I need to know this stuff to tell me. And then obviously when I had Riley, I was taking steroids throughout my pregnancy because I was flaring. And so I broached the subject with them then, because I was like, look, this is what happened last time. I wasn't prepared for it. I hadn't asked the questions beforehand. And they were like, actually, you can breastfeed on low dose steroids. It's fine. Some of it they think passes over, but it doesn't harm the baby and things like that. Obviously, I was only on, I think I was on 10 or 15 milligrams. It was one of the lower doses. So with him, it started off really well, but with him, he was just a very, very hungry baby. So 12.5 weeks, again, literally on the dot. With him, it was stopped again. I was looking to go back onto my other meds as well, but it was less of a emotional tug with him because I sort of had to say, no, enough is enough. I can't physically do this anymore. It was just wearing me out. So that was a bit easier. But yeah, it's one of those things. There's like a list of stuff and you think, oh, you don't know it until you're sort of going through it. But if you could ask all these things beforehand and get the information you need, it'd be a lot easier.
No, for sure. And like, what would your advice be then for women with IBD that are going through this, and how would they deal with this sort of subculture of not feeling good enough?
It's really hard, but I think don't listen to social media for a start, because a lot of that you'll get conflicting opinions. I think it's always best to speak to your consultants or your IBD. Obviously, we've got IBD nurses and that, which are a lot easier, I find now, to get hold of than when you were trying to sort of get in touch with a consultant sort of 10 years ago or whatever. And they can be really good. And there's also some of the charities and things, I think, set up. They often have IBD nurses and stuff as part of them that you can get advice from as well. So I think it's just being prepared, and like I say, having this list of thinking of everything that could come up and preempting it, and speaking to somebody and saying, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And what if I need to go back on medication? What can I take safely, and what can't I take safely? And just realizing that at the end of the day, you need to be as healthy as can be for your baby. And sometimes breastfeeding is a lot of work. It's hard on the body, never mind when you're trying to deal with a chronic illness as well on top of that.
I totally feel you. That's kind of led me into, like, you've lambasted social media there, so it kind of leads me into the next question is, like, from a social media perspective, like, how do you feel it's changed for us as a community? You mentioned, like, obviously, clearly it's a double-edged sword, but from a perspective of you as a woman and having found that community, which you mentioned earlier, and being part of it, like, what impacts has that made for you?
Without a doubt, the IBD and ostomy community saved me when I was going through that massive flare and then headed into surgery. If I hadn't have had people telling me what your experience isn't normal, you need to speak to your doctor about stuff like that, and then just support. People were texting me when I was in hospital and message and all that. I just think it was brilliant. And like I say, I've met a few people with stomas before I had my surgery, and just to see those people that were going out to work, that had their families, that were doing all the, like, normal stuff, which I probably thought, well, I certainly thought when I first got told I had Crohn's, I was like, I'm going to end up with one of those bags. And I thought that would be it. That would be the end. But it wasn't for them. And I think that's quite inspiring. I think you have to be careful with where you go to seek information sometimes, because some people have different experiences. And certainly with medical knowledge, I think you've got to be really, really careful. Sort of like asking those questions, like, what can I take safely when I'm breastfeeding? You could go on a forum and ask that, but all the people will have all different ideas, will have all been told different things, and they won't be you, and your situation may be very different to theirs. So I think in that sense, you've got to be careful with it. But as a community, support-wise, just being there, it's brilliant.
I think you're so right as well. Like, just understanding who you're getting advice from and taking it, like, make sure you accept it at that right level, is so important, because there's a lot of advice out there. That's a double-edged sword of social media, where before you might have felt really alone. There's now so much out there that it sometimes can be difficult to pick the right advice. But yeah, I've never had, whenever I first got diagnosed, I was diagnosed like 2001. And I was very hush-hushed, I'll be honest with about it, until 2013, when I had that major flare and had to have surgery. And then I started to find my feet on social media. And even then, it's not until the last few years that I've actually become actively promoting IBD and a life with IBD on social media. Because again, it's just one of those things where you kind of felt like it was my story and nobody would be interested in that. But again, like, it's what I found really interesting, I don't know if you're the same, is just realizing how many people are actually going through the same thing or have been through the same thing.
It's that support, isn't it? It's exactly that. I remember going on and being like, I'm not on my own. There's all these people that have got the same thing. And it's horrible to think that they've got the same thing as me. But it just felt amazing. Growing up as a child in the paediatric hospital, there was a lot more support there. We had group physio sessions, so we'd all go in together to have our physio together, and they'd do a week in the summer holidays where we all did activities together. And and things like that. And then you sort of get booted out at 18 to the adult hospital and all that disappears. So to find that online, it was just brilliant to see that I wasn't on my own, and it wasn't me just being a bit of a wimp. It really was quite bad what I was going through.
Yeah, and that's the other thing as well. Like, we can get so lost in our own heads and, you know, really go down the rabbit hole, and just that jerk to say, hey, you're not alone is such an important factor. And then to realize, you know, that you mentioned this, people saying that what your experience isn't normal, but it's also, there's an element of where it normalizes what you are going through and makes you feel less of a freak, for want of a better word. You know, like having all like bloody diarrhea and stuff, and you know, urgency and accidents. Because again, it's a taboo within a healthy culture. You know, if you're soiling yourself in public, it's like, did you not learn when you were a child?
Yeah, exactly. I saw quite a good meme yesterday, and it was like, for my mental health, I've got to stop comparing myself to a healthy person. And I was like, that's really true, because you grow up, and like I say, I don't know anybody else really with anything like what I've got. So the only people I have to compare myself to are healthy people, and that can be quite sort of disheartening. Whereas when you meet the people with the same things, they buoy you along, because a lot of them are doing amazing things still, despite what they're going through. But you realise that actually it's okay to want to have a rest day after you've had a big day out or whatever. Yeah,
and I think one of the things I joined a group, Ostomy athletes. I mean, I've since gone and got a J pouch, which thankfully is going really well for me currently. Because I know some people can get real complications with it. But the Ostomy athletes group is one of the ones that's made me sort of, I was a personal trainer, or still am a personal trainer in the military. I'm involved within the rehabilitation circles, but it's weird that I would push my patients to return to their normal levels of activity if we could. But for me, I was like, it's never happening. I'm done. I'm spent now. Like, I've had all this. And it was actually that group that made me realize, actually, I can still do hard things. There's a particular guy, Vince Massa, who's been on the show a couple of times, who was really, he's a big into his CrossFit. Another couple of guys, my mate John Felton, little Johnny Hughes. One's doing training for an Ironman. The other one has only had his surgery this time last year, and is now back up pushing PRs within his weightlifting. And I'm just like, if these people are doing it, I've got no excuse. There is a way for me to do it. And I think that's one of the most positive things.
I think I've noticed, I don't know whether it's just the age I've got to, or I think because I've been unhealthy for so long, I grew up eating whatever I wanted, never putting on weight. And I don't think that was probably a good thing. I think it was the fact that my body didn't absorb things properly. And since my surgery, I've just put more and more weight on, and I've sort of got to the point now, I was like, I've really got to do something. But I've been doing something with Zoe Wright, who is the bodybuilder. She had the ostomy. She's now got a J pouch as well. So she's been doing some coaching for women on Facebook, and it's been absolutely brilliant. But like you say, it's looking at people like that. I'm part of BIA, a committee member of like my local area group, and there's a lady in there, and she does massive gym challenges, and she's like, oh, I went to 3 classes today. And I'm like, people can do it, and it is possible. I don't think I'll be doing 3 gym classes or a complete Zoe Wright workout ever, but I was like, if I can do my half an hour, I'm happy.
Yeah, and actually Zoe Wright is another one. I only really discovered her during lockdown because I had that much more time on social media, I guess. But yeah, like, she was another one that I was like, just, you know, you just screwed an eye, and then I realized, oh, she's got a J pouch. I was like, look at the shape this woman is in. What I don't understand is like how people are negative about her and her body image. And I'm like, going, are you people like, do you not understand the work this person has gone to?
I was just going to say that. I think that's it, isn't it? It's just that dedication and that. And when she was doing the competition, she's not doing the competitions now, but when she was doing those, she had her ostomy during that whole time. And And it was like, could you imagine the work? Like, I struggle to stay hydrated every day with an ostomy, but then to go to that sort of level and manage that is, yeah.
It's incredible. And she's doing some really good things for the community. I think she's just started, I don't know if you joined that one with her, where she just started a thing where she's doing training sessions every couple of days online.
Yeah,
she's got a group and all going, which is brilliant.
I know the Empowered Women group. That's the one I'm in. Yeah. Like I say, I can't complete the full workout, but I was like, I'll build up to it. But that's
the point, though, isn't it? That's like, you know, you've made that most important and crucial step.
Yeah. And I think when you see people, obviously there's always the worry about like hernias and how much can you do with your stomach. And obviously as a woman, I've had babies and my stomach isn't quite what it was a few years ago. So add that all together, but then to see women doing stuff like that, it's like, well, actually you can do it, and you can do it safely and still do it really well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's the other complication as well. Like genuinely, I don't know how women are like more important in the world, so to speak. Like the amount of stuff that you actually have to go through. It does make me feel lucky to be a man, that I don't have to think about all of these different things. But like you just mentioned, like the changes you go through from pre-postnatal, and like just on a hormonal level, and then you go into a physiological level, and then you go into a psychological level. I'm just like,
yeah. I think
like
something that she's been talking about quite a lot in the Empowered Women group as well, which I meant to mention earlier, and then I forgot. Is about periods and hormones as a woman, and how that can affect you exercising and what you should do, when you should do it in your cycle and things like that. But it's quite interesting because it's another thing for women to think about with IBD, and there hasn't been a massive amount of research, but I know I'm not the only one. I've seen other women speak about the fact that their symptoms are a lot worse when they are on their period than any other time of the month. And it can't be just a coincidence. It seems, like I say, I've seen quite a lot of women talk about this, and
yeah, it's mental. I mean, it's the science and the research going into women's health studies at the minute from a sports and exercise medicine perspective is amazing, because it's just chucking out some amazing research and really, you know, giving us a better understanding of women's health in general, but obviously with a focus on sports performance. And one of the really interesting things is actually, like, whenever you look at a woman's menstrual cycle, if you take right at certain points within that menstrual cycle, you have more growth hormone and different structures like stem cells and stuff available to your system. So therefore, actually, there's a really I can't remember where it is, but at a certain point, I think it's just before the bleed, that you're in a really advantageous place with regards to training. And then obviously when you start to bleed, then you have the sort of risk of anemia and downcycling. So you need to downcycle the training and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what Zoe's focused quite a bit on. She has a lady on to speak about it, so, like, talk about some of this research that they've done and when's best to do certain workouts. It's really interesting, and it just shows that it affects so much more than just you maybe being a crazy loon for a week every month.
But that's it. Do you know what? It really kills the throwaway comments. It kind of, like, when you start looking at these things, blokes of my sort of background and things, we're very flippant, and we do, you know, throw things out there without really thinking about what we're saying, but it just makes them even more unforgivable sometimes. You just like, oh, why?
We're like it with my mum. She's a nightmare, and we always make jokes about it, and she's like, you're a girl, you're not supposed to say these things. But
oh no, totally. So I've reached a part of the show where I like to put you really on the spot. Not that we haven't done it already tonight. And it's a part of the show that I call the three truths. So essentially, I've robbed it from a guy called Lewis Howes, who's got a pretty good podcast. And what it boils down to is your time on Earth is coming to an end many years from now.
Hopefully.
But everything you've ever created, everything you've ever done has disappeared. And you have the opportunity to leave your three truths or your 3 life lessons that you would like the world, or you think the world would be left in a better place knowing. So the question is, what are your 3 truths or your 3 life lessons?
Oh, I think, well, that's difficult. I think the first one, my tagline for my blog is something along the lines of living happily with happy and positively with chronic illness. And it's because that's what I believe you can still do, even when you're chronically ill, even when you're flaring. You can still have a happy life, you can still have a positive life, and a life that means something, whether it be what you do with your work and children and all that. So I'd say that one, because I think that can be quite true. The second one would be, I think it would just be to think about what another person might be going through before you say something. It's quite a big thing on social media, isn't it? You never know what's going on behind closed doors, and just be kind and all that. But I just think so many more people should do that, and the world would be a much happier place. And the third one would be, don't give up, I suppose. One of my favourite quotes, it was actually by Lance Armstrong, and obviously he then got sort of accused of all sorts of bad stuff, but he said, pain is temporary, quitting lasts forever. And I remember hearing it when I was probably about 14. I think he'd won Sports Personality of the Year or something. And that's what he said, because he'd obviously gone through cancer battle and all that, and then gone on to win Tour de France and whatever else in cycling that they do. And it just really struck a chord with me. And I remember scribbling it down. And for years, I just had the little note paper that I'd scribbled it down on at the time. And I was just like, yeah, because even though at the time you think, God, this will never end, it does. And it does get better. And you will come at, for every flare up, there's a flare down. That's what they always say. So, yeah, just keep going.
I think they're really good. So trying to live happily and positively, or always see the positive in things. I've written down to walk in others' shoes, or be mindful of others' experiences. And then just don't give up, because pain is temporary and quitting is forever. Yeah, I think, again, I do. This is one of my favorite parts of the show, because people give such interesting responses, and I really, really enjoyed those responses. They are very powerful. What is interesting is your Lance Armstrong, and obviously, yeah, he ended up getting absolutely lambasted, like absolutely destroyed. And you know, there's a process of ego behavior and denial and outright lying. For large parts of the investigation. But there's a really interesting show called Icarus. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah, I've not watched it.
So Icarus is about sports doping. And in particular, it's a decent cyclist who essentially wants to put himself on a Lance Armstrong course of illegal drugs, so to speak. And whilst the show is going on, it is exploring drug doping within the sport of cycling, and how rife is it, what teams are doing it, what's happening. And he goes through this process with the intent that he will then smash a particular race. And this race has got some pro riders in it, and a very, very, very broad field, but top end is top end. Yeah. And he does it first 1 year clean, and then he's got a year to then do all the training and take all the drugs and see where he comes. And I'm going to tell you anyway, which is probably going to make you not need to see the show. But essentially what happens is that he figures out actually the margin the drugs give isn't as big a margin as people think.
You've got to still have the talent, haven't you, to to do it. It's not all about physical.
And when I watched it, it brought me back to Lance Armstrong's first book, which is titled "It's Not About the Bike." And in my head is going, oh, so it's not about the drugs.
Yeah.
So it's so like, as much as like I'm not condoning doping in sport, definitely not condoning it. I'm not condoning in the media circus that surrounded the Lance Armstrong sort of issue and the denial and lies and everything that went along with it. But it's just interesting to know, or I felt it was interesting to know, that actually there is a fair chance that actually Lance Armstrong did do it mostly by himself.
Yeah. Well, you've got to have that silly little things like knowing when to overtake and when to go faster and when to take it a bit easier. It's not all physical strength, is it? That's not going to get you through, I suppose. I can't even comprehend why anybody would want to take steroids for that, because I've been on them for 9 years now and they're awful things. They're not very nice. But
I think the crazy thing, I think for us with steroids, is you see the risk so much more because it's you have to sign off on the risk. Yeah. And that, I think, is where the real reality that comes into it,
hard, isn't it? Like psychologically, to say, oh well, yeah, I'll take this, even though you're saying that these risks are attached, because I've got no other choice really. But
and it's like I know people who take topical steroids. I know people that will do anabolic, and they'll do a course and they'll do it for 6 months, and then they'll dry off for 6 months, and they'll do. I'm just like, I get why they want to do it, but I don't feel that gym users and people that are using it for those reasons, or because they want to get hench or whatever, I don't think they really, if they were to sit down and really understand the risk factors for a vanity purpose, is just not worth it whatsoever. I don't want to be sounding like I'm getting on my high horse about it. I think our exposure to the risks and the fact
different viewpoint, isn't it, that we have. I had a hip replacement when I was 23, and that was due to steroids. I didn't even have arthritis in my hips. It's probably one of the only joints in my body that I don't, but the steroids have basically killed off the ball part of my left hip joint. It's called avascular necrosis. It's something to do with the blood supply to it. And I had to have my hip replaced, and that was due to steroids. And I just think, and that's like, yeah.
Like, how long of dosages were you taking with steroids? Because you're the first person I've known to have got necrosis from steroids.
Yeah, I've met one other person that's had a similar thing, or not even met them, sort of come across them online. But up to that point, I'd only had a couple of sort of courses of oral steroids, because I've got, if you get rheumatoid arthritis as a child, you can get this connected eye problem, which I then developed when I was 7. So I had to have a lot of steroid eye drops, and they ended up having to give me a couple of courses of sort of oral pred. And other than that, I'd only had steroid injections into actual joints. So they've put them in like my knees before, they've done them in the elbows. I have had them in my eyes, which freaks everybody out, but they've done them in there as well. So it was only those. I'd never been on an IV course, really high doses or anything. And that's what it had done. Obviously I was a child, so they didn't really want to be pumping me full of them, but
again, it's such a difficult decision to make, isn't it? Particularly, if you're looking at a child, like if you were 70, maybe we go around and go, oh, well, you've had a good run, you don't really need your knees, like just take it easy. But a child, you are going to be like, well, how do we get this person to be?
Yeah.
And it's just such a sucky thing with medicine, that it's all about risk management. It's all about weighing up the pros and cons, isn't it? Unfortunately, when it comes to topical medicine and putting substances into people's bodies, it is, it's a juggling act. It's always a risk reward. And generally speaking, what we look at is the reward versus the risk. And if the rewards outweigh, it's good. If it doesn't, then it's a question.
I've always said as well, because we're young, we've got young kids, I was like, I'd rather be as healthy as can be now to enjoy this time than for them to say at 60, oh, now you can have this. And it's like, well, I'm going to be 60. I'm not really going to be wanting to do all the stuff I wanted to do back then. So
yeah, no, totally. And again, like when you look at things like hip replacements and knee replacements and stuff like that, there's a significant discussion. I don't know if you I'm assuming you would have had it with your consultant about the type of hip that they're going to potentially put in, be it a ceramic cam or be it aluminium or steel. And also as well, there's different styles of sockets depending on the activity level that you would like to have. And all of them, again, have a lifespan. And it's like, so like they probably told you.
Ceramic on ceramic, they didn't want to put the metal one in because apparently that can eke out, and it's been found in the placentas of pregnant women. And they don't know what that can cause, so they just don't recommend you doing it. My doctor was like, if I was talking to my wife and she hadn't had children yet, I would not recommend she had it. So I was like, right, well, then I don't want that. And they did ceramic on ceramic because I was young, because I was going to be more active than, say, somebody who's 70 and having a hip replacement. And it's been 11 years in November, it will be. And it's actually, touch wood, fantastic. I had it x-rayed a couple of years ago, and it was brilliant to see it on the thing. And they were like, it's still looking perfect. It squeaks a little bit, which is a bit funny. I can't make it do it, but it just does it sometimes of its own accord. But yeah, it's been brilliant. Whereas my knee, I'm having problems with one of my knees. I was due to have surgery in March. Obviously that got cancelled due to COVID. It hasn't been rearranged yet. And the discussions cropped up about replacing that, but they really don't want to do that because there's a lot less success rate with a knee, and I could be left in a worse position than I am now. So it's sort of like a juggling act of.
Yeah, well, the hip is the most stable joint in the body, and it is the easiest to replace. One of the bonuses of actually having a ceramic, you may not have been told this, is obviously it doesn't get affected as much by the weather, which is obviously strange. So a lot of people that have metal hips find it in the winter, it just never seems to heat up.
Yeah, I've not thought about that. No, they didn't bring it up because, like I say, it was pretty much straight away agreed it was going to be ceramic anyway. So,
and it also acts like the barometers you can get to tell you when it's going to rain or when it's going to.
Yeah.
So because it's metal, the magnetic fields have some form of play on it. So generally, what people find is they're able to predict when it's going to be crap weather. So when it's crap weather, they generally feel more achy in their hip.
I'm a bit like that with my knees and that in general anyway, just from my arthritis, because my knees are more effective when it's sort of like rainy weather. Although
it blows my mind that. It does blow my mind.
It's crazy.
Whenever like, because we've got arthritic patients, so we've got patients with like things going on in their back and stuff. And it's like, the weather, really? Does it? How?
I remember I used to get asked about it all the time when I was a kid. They were like, does your weather affect it? We're like, no, it doesn't, because I generally always have a major flare-up in the summer holidays when I wanted to be outside playing, and I'd be stuck with swollen knees and stuff. But as I've got older, I've definitely noticed not so much the cold factor, because I get pretty cold. I like to stay warm and snuggly. But when it's rainy, or even when it's been, because it's been so humid lately, I've struggled just with that.
That's interesting. Humidity, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's just this sort of wetness in the air, I suppose. But yeah, so now I'm like, well, yeah, the weather did really affect me, but I didn't know it at the time.
So what are your hopes for the future then? Where is Spoonie Mummy going, and where's Natalie going?
Well, I'd sort of written this year off. I'd not booked a holiday, and I mean, to be fair, we probably wouldn't have been able to go anyway. But I'd kind of written this year off because I thought I was going to have my knee surgery and then my bowel surgery, and by next year I'd be all fixed and I'm ready to sort of go. But I think that will probably be all pushed back to next year. I might get the knee done before the end of the year, but I don't know yet. but I'm doing my degree at the minute with the Open University, so that restarts again in about 3 weeks. I'm doing sort of psychology-based subjects because I want to become a psychotherapist specialising in people with chronic illness, because I think it's a big area that's just so underdone. The NHS, obviously, as stretched as it is, our doctors focus on our physical symptoms, but I think there's a hell of a lot of mental health stuff that comes along with having a chronic illness. So I've got, because I do it part-time, so I'm just starting what would technically be my 3rd year if I was in a brick uni, but I'm doing it split over 2 years. So yeah, I've got 2 more years of that left, and then hopefully I'll be released on people.
Oh, that's a really admirable thing to be doing, and you're right. You know, there's the holistic approach to medicine and health is such an important avenue, and more so now, I think, than ever. Particularly when you think about doctors who do tend to treat symptoms as opposed to treat the problem. But it's almost a cycle that's been forced upon them as well now, with the types of illnesses and stuff that we seem to be developing as a society. There's a interesting, I don't know if you know her, but there's Zumba with Anita. There's a woman called Anita who goes by the alias of Zumba with Anita. She is a mental health worker, and one of her things is doing dance therapy, like Zumba with them, and just getting people active. But she does what you're talking about, specializes in employment law, around sort of mental health and stuff like that. So she's a really interesting person. We've tried to get her on the show a couple of times, but we actually sat down and recorded once, but for whatever reason, like I think there was a storm or something happening, the audio was so garbled that we couldn't actually release it, and we're still trying to organize to get back on. But that's what it is, organizing shows like this. But yeah, like, kudos to you for getting out there and doing something that, you know, will benefit other people. I think that's such a laudable trait to have, is working for something that's bigger than yourself. Yeah,
I think so. It wasn't something that was ever brought up with me, and it wasn't until I had a really hard time, sort of 2 or 3 years after being diagnosed with Crohn's, and I spoke to my GP, and she was like, "You've got 2 major chronic illnesses. You've got to 29 without any mental health problems." She's like, "That's a feat in itself." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean? Like, nobody's ever talked to me about how I'm feeling." And so yeah, that was quite an eye-opener, I think.
Yeah, and it's such a, you know, the fact that you did get there without having a mental episode is laudable, and you know, it is a really important thing to understand that is positive. Yeah, and it's huge. I mean, the amount of people that do like struggle, and again, it's I mean, this is another podcast in itself, the whole mental health side of things, and understanding that different people have different levels of stress, and when they breach that, will have different responses. So like, my breaking point may be different to yours, and when I do break, my response may be different to yours, and how I recover and react. It's so individualistic. And we try to put it into boxes, and we try to define it, and we try to make it all fit in a row and be pretty, but unfortunately it's a very messy subject, and we don't like that. Sidetrack slightly, but where can the people find you?
The blog's theSpooniemummy.com, and I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, if you do that. All under Spoonie Mummy. Pinterest. Yeah. I quite like it.
What was on Pinterest then?
Well, it's kind of a search engine. For me, that's how it acts, because I obviously upload my blog posts, but you can find all sorts on there. I do a lot of like crafting with the kids, so I'll go on there and search. There's hundreds and hundreds of activity. So Halloween's coming up, so I'm already searching for what we can do to decorate and things like that. But yeah,
I might have to get my wife to follow you then.
Oh yeah, I love it. I just like, it's not all to do with my blog that I'm on there. I just enjoy it, but yeah, I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but to be honest, I don't understand it very well. So well,
that'll become more important when you've got your qualification and things like that. But yeah, the only thing I knew Pinterest from is like from wedding planning with my wife, and basically having the phone thrown in front of me every night, or whenever.
There's quite a good chronic illness bloggers sort of building up on there, like a lot of posts about it, because you're basically presented with a photo, aren't you? You click that, you go through to a blog post or something somebody's written. So it's quite handy. I've got sort of boards for health, and there's one that's more IBD and stoma specific, one that's more arthritis specific, and as well as sharing like my own blog posts on there if I find one that's like, oh, that's interesting.
That is amazing. Like I've never explored it, so it'll be an interesting time to dive into it, really, I think. I'd just like to take the time to appreciate you for all that you're doing within the community. You know, like the Spoonie Mummy blog is helping so many people, for taking the time out of your own life, you know, to better yourself for the good of others, you know, that greater good that we mentioned earlier. It's so important, and I think it's such a beautiful thing to see in someone. And yeah, just I want to thank you for coming on and doing all you're doing. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. I was very nervous before I came on, but I like to talk. I know I'd be fine.
Yeah, it's. I think the live thing as well. Now, I certainly scared, but it helps me so much doing it live. It forces me to put content out. I get so selfish whenever I record it. It sounds strange.
Yeah, I started a YouTube channel, and it's sort of gone stagnant, and I was like, I really need to get back on to doing this sort of filming. I think lockdown sort of had us all in a bit of a so hopefully I'm sort of setting up coming back with that, and so that's another place you could find me, YouTube. Hopefully
I think there's been a few people in the comments talking about your YouTube channel.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think a guy called Graham and Pauletta Harris.
Yeah, I used to, we did a live YouTube show called the Ibd and Ostomy Support Show. We did it for about a year and a half, I think. And we finished about a year and a half ago. There was like 5 of us that had come on and talk about anything and everything to do with ileostomies, and we all had our ostomies. Well, there's ileostomies, there was a girl with urostomy as well, so
there you are. Paulette's giving us a thumbs up.
That's where they know. Paulette's in my IA group as well, so I know her from there too.
Is it? What is the IA group? Where can people find that?
It's a charity. IA is the Ileostomy and Internal Pouch Association. So it's a charity that sort of covers the whole of the UK, but we have obviously individual sort of generally county-based groups. Here it's not Sandarby because we're 2 smaller groups that we put together because we're only next door to one another. But they're all over the country. But we run, I mean, we're not running anything at the minute. We're trying to do some bits on Zoom and stuff, but we do coffee mornings and evening meals. We just all meet up and chat about not just poo and stomas. We talk about everything else as well. But yeah, it's really good. You can join up. You get your journal, which is like the magazine 4 times a year and things like that. So it's nice. It's a lot of support and information again on the website that's not opinion based, if that makes sense. We which is good to be able to use as a resource.
Ah, cool. So it's like it comes from a sort of an official from an official party, basically. It's research based or research informed.
Yeah, there's IA is the ileostomy, and we have the internal pouch people with us as well. And then there's Colostomy UK and Urostomy Association as well, UA, to cover the 3 different. I mean, we've got like somebody with a colostomy in our group, so it's not specifically you can't come in if you've not got this thing, but we sort of help people that have either had surgery or might be approaching surgery. They offer like a visiting service, so you get matched up with one of the trained IA visitors. They look at like age, what surgery you're having, location and all that, and try and match you with one of the people in the database that's sort of most similar to you, so you can talk to them about
Oh, that's great. That sounds like a really positive group of charities. And like you say, I guess it's good that they're open so that you can fit where you feel you fit, I guess.
Yeah, well, this lady joined our group. We've got quite a good young core group. I think they technically have young is under 40, but we extend it. We say young or young at heart. Some of our older members come to the young events as well. But she found there was more younger people of her age in our group. So even though she's got the colostomy, she's sort of just preferred that environment, I suppose. But
yeah, and again, that's such a positive thing. Okay, guys, so thank you very much for joining us. It's been an exceptionally enjoyable session chatting to Natalie. As you can see, she's had a lot of experiences in her life that have so much value for people in our community. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you on the next one. Bye for now.